God is good. All the time. All the time. God is good. We're all pretty much familiar with the term scruples. You don't like people who are unscrupulous, right? Scruples. Where did that word come from? Have you ever thought about that before? It's actually an old Latin word, and it comes from something like scrupulos or scrupulous. And it was transformed into this idea of a doubt that pricks your mind, a sharp pricking your mind. But it originated with the Roman legions, the armies. And so they would march, and you've seen like Ben-Hur and movies like that where they've got the sandals, they kind of have the lace strap coming up their ankles, and they would get that sharp rock in that sandal while they were marching. So they had a choice. Do they march on in pain and uncomfortably? Do they stop marching and risk the wrath of the centurion, the guy who's over them? What would they do? But the idea of the leaders, the governors, the officials that would be in those things here where they would carry them on their shoulders, one of those leaders or the litters, whatever they would call it, they never had to risk that. They never walked. They never got the sharp stone, and so that's how come politicians have been known as unscrupulous. I know it sounds funny, it sounds like a preacher joke, but it's true. That's where it came from. So, consequences of stopping, consequences of not stopping. When I was in seminary, for my first degree, 9/11 happened. And when I went out for a second degree, I thought about they offered a degree in Muslim studies. And my wife, with more wisdom than me, said, Craig, what would you really do with that? It's your preaching that needs improvement. If you're going to go for another degree, work on your preaching, which was true. And so I did preaching and leadership. But I still took a class. It was Ministry of Muslims 603. It was a 600-level class. And to me, it was fascinating. And our professor had actually spent time in the Middle East. And he had us read this book. Cohen was the author. And it was about the conflict between Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin. You guys remember that? Back in 78, 79. The Sinai Peninsula. Who gets to fly the flag there, right? Who gets to open the Suez Canal? Right? Who gets the territory back from the 7-Day War? And so I think Jimmy Carter was part of that. I think he had them at Camp David. But the interesting part was, for me, the takeaway that I've never forgotten since I read the book was that both groups had the same set of facts, but they interpreted them differently. And Cohen uses a phrase in the book called dialogue to the death. These warring factions, which have the whole world attentive to their problems and the conflict, they were speaking past each other. They had the same set of facts on the table, but they interpreted them differently. And what Cohen discusses, and I think it's relevant today, especially in light of what we looked at this weekend, which, by the way, I wrote this sermon last week before this weekend's bombing. So, anyway, take it for what it's worth. Cohen said that the Israelis were more westernized. And so they looked at facts analytically, logically, reasonably. That's their way of interpreting what the situation was. But the Egyptians, they filtered everything through what's called an honor-shame culture. And until they were able to work through the different ways of viewing facts, they couldn't get anywhere. And then, of course, once they did, what happened? They signed a treaty, and things went great after that. But even with an interpreter, they still had difficulties looking at it. So, and again, I wrote this before this weekend's event, and I asked the question, how would you like to be Trump's advisor right now in the midst of what's going on between Israel and Iran? how would you like to be trying to tell him what to do? I know what I would tell him. Last year in London, England, we met a guy. He was a driver for the vans driving everyone to the airport. And we started talking outside the hotel, and he had a really interesting accent. And I said, what is that? Are you French? It sounds kind of French. He goes, no, I'm Persian. And I said, Persia? I can't place where Persia is on the map. He says, I'm from Iran. But he says, we're not like what your American news is portrayed. He says, we don't like the Ayatollahs. We want an overthrow. We love America. It was an interesting discussion. So I think if I were like sitting at a table with Trump, I would want to share some story like that, because I think that's more significant than just facts on a sheet of whatever military armaments there are or positions on the map. I feel like those type of stories hold a lot of significance. So what does it mean to say I love America? And he follows up the conversation. We want you guys to come in and overthrow the government. That's what the people on the ground want. Now, I share all that to bring us into Ecclesiastes 8, which, side note, when Solomon writes this, he is the king. That was just a screenshot from this morning as I was finalizing the PowerPoint. When I pulled up my YouTube, this is what's on the news right now. All right, so Solomon says, who is like the wise? Who can be compared to someone with wisdom, right? And who knows the interpretation of a thing? Facts alone are not enough. You have to know how to interpret them, right? A man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the hardness of his face is changed. Right? Our body language speaks volumes of what's going on in our heart, in our mind, in our soul. I say, keep the king's command. Of course you do. You're the king. Keep the king's command because of God's oath to him. Be not hasty to go from his presence. Do not take your stand in an evil cause, for he does whatever he pleases. For the word of the king is supreme, and who may say to him, what are you doing? Well, there's a lot to unpack there. Number one, whoever the advisor is, the counselor to the king, apparently wants to avoid confronting the king with what he believes in, so he'd rather avoid the conflict and leave. Solomon's saying, when you have good advice, don't try to slink away. And now you may be saying, well, Frank, we don't live in a time of a monarchy. We don't live under kings. We don't have a king over us. I'm glad you would think that. And as true as that is, the flip side of that coin is if we'll be honest, we could be vulnerable, we like to be our own king. We like to be the king of the castle. We like to be the one who makes our decisions. We like to make our choices. And typically, most people resent being told what to do. Most people bristle if they're told, you're wrong, and this is what the right way is. So keep in mind that we like to be our own monarch, our own ruler. We like to make our own decisions. Because sometimes we have a hard time hearing advice. So whether you have decent advice to offer someone, or whether you think that you are in control, knowing the facts and knowing the wisdom to interpret them are not the same thing. And I'll give you a great example. You ever been to the emergency room before? You ever been to a doctor's visit? Do you ever have the doctor pull up that it's not quite plastic, but it's not paper. You can kind of see through it. It's kind of in black and white. Usually there's like no flesh or bones, but you see a skeletal structure. What am I talking about? An x-ray, right? As soon as the doctor holds up, everyone in the room is a radiologist, right? We all think we're an expert. Just show me the x-ray, doc. I can figure this out from here. I got it. No. You know, radiologists are trained. It takes years to be able to look at an x-ray and to interpret the data that is there. But me, I've never been in med school a day in my life. Well, I mean, I've been on WebMD, that counts for something, right? Yeah. I've never been in med school, but I can look at the same information and think I know what I see, but I don't. That's where wisdom comes in. So having the information is not equal to knowing what the facts mean, what to do with them, or what the long-term consequences may be. That requires wisdom. Scripture goes over and over and over again how much value to place on wisdom. And wisdom can be trained, it can be sharpened, it can be developed. So, Solomon's the king. He says, listen to the king, right? The counselor may be tempted to avoid the conflict. There's something else in here that I think we're missing. Something that in our day of social media is lacking. So, keep the king's command because God makes an oath to the king. Right? Don't be hasty to go from his presence. Do not take your stand in an evil case. Don't go with what's popular just because it's popular, because the king's going to do whatever he pleases. The word of the king is supreme, and who may say to him, what do you think you're doing? You and I, this is a struggle, again, in the age of social media, we don't have to offer our opinion on everything that's out there. That should be liberating. We don't have to put our 2 cents in for every topic that's out there. And in fact, as Christians, as believers, when someone says, well, what do you think about? And maybe it's us bombing Iran. I don't care what it is. Well, what do you think about that? It's okay to say, let me think about that. We don't have to go for the throat and push what our opinion is on people. And we don't have to try to debate every argument that's out there. And that's tough because we've kind of developed a culture of sensationalizing arguments. In fact, if you'll watch many of the cable TV news broadcasts, even when the commentator agrees with the guest, they try to make some type of controversy, like they're, well, that's not what you really think, right? Tell me what you really think. And they try to get a little bit of conflict going just, I guess, to generate interest. Otherwise, maybe the news would be boring. I don't know. But we don't have to say everything we think all the time. I want to take you back to Cohen's book for a moment, talking about the Israeli-Egyptian conflict. One of the keys for that conflict being resolved was understanding the Arabic Muslim idea of a mediator. In fact, they have a word for it. It's wasta. That's this idea of like a mediator, someone that can help negotiate a conflict. And oftentimes, we think that we are the key, right? We're going to counsel the king, we're going to accept counsel. And oftentimes, it takes that outside voice, someone who is perhaps unbiased. Or as the old saying goes, I don't have a dog in this fight. I think oftentimes we are so quick to say what we think about whatever the situation is that we don't give an opportunity for the outside voice to say, yes, these are the facts, these are the truth. Have you thought about it like this? Have you thought about what the long-term effect is? Have you asked the what's, the where's, and the why's? And that has so much application for parents and children, husbands and wives, church friends. This idea that although we're looking at the same set of facts, we might not see them differently. Our childhood, our education, the work that we're in. I'll give you a great example. I saw another one of these beans. Last year I saw it for people in Asheville, and it's like a fake sign that says "Stop moving here." I saw one this week, and it's Kingsport, and I forget what it was like Bays Mountain or whatever, but they had the sign so it looked like Hollywood. It says "Stop moving here." All right, I'm going to interpret that differently than a lot of other people. Everybody moving in, the land grab, all the people moving in from other states, they're making it difficult for younger people to buy homes, right? The price of everything has gone up. I see something different, though. I don't see overcrowding. I don't see the purchasing of homes as difficult. I see people with cash coming in, spending money in our region, and helping improve things like construction. Have you noticed how many apartment buildings have been built lately? I, having a concrete pumping business, see this as something good. We as a pumping business, not I by myself. And there was a period of time recently where we were doing 2 pool decks a week, right? So many people were putting pools in. Same set of facts. We've got people coming in. It's a land grab. They're buying up property. They're coming in here. They're moving. I'm going to see it differently than someone else. Which one of us is right? Obviously, I am. Right? We're all going to see these things differently, and that is a breakthrough for, like I said, the relationships between parents and children, husband and wife, friends, whatever. Knowing that we can have the same facts, but value the information and interpret it differently. That's part of maturity. That's part of wisdom. That's part of growing up. Which is why we have to be able to submit to ideals and morals and values that are above and beyond us, that we can't create ourselves. Whoever keeps the command, Solomon says, will know no evil thing, and the wise heart will know the proper time and the just way. Understanding the context, understanding timing, being wise, right? For there is a time and a way for everything. Kind of harkens back to chapter 3. A time to plant, a time to sow. Right? There's a time and a way for everything. Although man's troubles lies heavily on him, for he does not know what is to be, or who can tell him, right? We have so many uncertainties. There's so much unpredictability about the future. So how do we base our decisions? We have to have something that's above and beyond us. And the fact is, doing the right thing isn't always easy. The difficult thing is, sometimes doing the right thing doesn't ensure safety or comfort or good results. Sometimes we pay a price for doing the right thing. Sometimes life gets more difficult doing the right thing. So, I think human nature lends towards the idea where if I think I have the power, and I think I have the control, and I think I can leverage that, then it's going to be beneficial and not come at a price. But that's not what Solomon says. We don't know what's going to happen. In fact, we don't know what is to be. Who can tell him? No man has the power to retain the spirit. When your time has come, your time has come. Or power over the day of death. It's going to happen. There is no discharge from war. Once the battle is started, once you engage, you can't just say, time out. Or like when you're in junior high, redo. I want to do over. No, once you pull the trigger, there are consequences. There is no discharge from war, nor will wickedness deliver those who are given to it. And all this I observed while applying my heart to all that is done under the sun. Listen to the last part of this verse. When man had power over man to his hurt. It's not about power. It's not about leverage. That's not going to bring peace of mind. That's not going to bring satisfaction. Having all the power of the king came at a price. It weighs heavily on him, and it can be to his own hurt, according to Solomon. Well, one thing is a guarantee here, according to Solomon, that there are no guarantees in life. We don't know how it will be. There is so much uncertainty because there's so much that's out of our control. We can't control. We can't find our way through it. So then we say, well, how do we navigate it? How do we navigate these choices? And this is where wisdom comes in. The title of the sermon, right? Sharpening our scruples. Scruples, that idea of having a conscience. What's the difference between following your conscience and following your heart? Are they the same thing? I don't think so. I think the heart doesn't think about consequences. The heart will tell us things that we selfishly want without looking at consequences or long term. With a conscience, which can be sharpened or can be dulled, that looks at consequences. That looks at choices. That looks at what's not just selfish, but what could be rewarding or what could be remorseful. And I think that's what Solomon is honing in on. Having a conscience that's guided by wisdom, not by selfishness, but looks at safety, caution, and overall what is, like he said, following God's commands, which is at the end of the day why sharpening our scruples really does matter. Having a clear conscience, because that's what's truly invaluable. That's truly what's irreplaceable. And that's truly what compensates and brings clarity. Let's stand and sing.